everyone. My name's Dave O'Neill. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Indeed, and I'd like to welcome you to this installment of Here to Help, which is Indeed's look at how we've been navigating the global impact of COVID-19. We've been sharing our response to the crisis as a company and also sharing what we are doing as a business to help job seekers and employers all over the world at this critical time. COVID-19 has created a significant shift in the way we are living and has impacted businesses of all types. One of the hardest hit sectors has been live entertainment, including sports. Professional sports leagues shut down quickly beginning in March and are just starting now to operate again on adjusted schedules. And one of the world's largest and most eagerly anticipated sporting events, the Olympics, was postponed until next summer. The 2020 Games, originally scheduled to begin in Tokyo just a couple of weeks from today, have been pushed out by 1 year. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Peter Sherrard, the CEO of the Olympic Federation of Ireland. As the head of Team Ireland, Peter has helped the athletes, coaches, and support staff to adapt to the postponement of the Games, prepare for the rescheduled Games, and operate under the restrictions imposed by the pandemic. As a partner to Team Ireland, I'm proud on behalf of Indeed to welcome Peter and to find out more about how Team Ireland is getting ready for Tokyo 2021.
Thank you, Dave. It's a real pleasure to be here and a real honor really to be speaking to all of the staff from Indeed worldwide. You're great partners and a great assistance to us, and I'm really happy to help.
Well, it's great to see you. It was just over a year ago that Indeed's leadership team was over in Dublin announcing our sponsorship of Team Ireland for the 2020 Tokyo Games. So it's great to see you. And first off, how are you doing? How's your family doing right now?
Yeah, good to see you. It's been a challenge, I think, for everyone. But I have a 11-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old daughter, and thankfully they've been keeping themselves entertained largely during the lockdown. We've had since approximately mid-March, we've been working from home. It's been quite a seamless transition from that point of view, but obviously it brings its challenges. On the plus side, I've had some time to spend with my family in closer quarters, but trying to juggle that with the needs of looking after the arrangements for Tokyo 2021, as it will now be, has been a challenge at times. But I think we've all faced through that, and we've all learned quite a lot about ourselves in the process.
Yeah, it's certainly been a unique experience, and it's amazing to see what's going on around the world and how people are dealing with it, and really stepping up to try to help people in our communities. But take me back for a minute to just before COVID-19 hit. So back to early 2020, what were you and your team focused on at that point?
Yeah, it was hugely ramping up. I mean, the activities, the work rate was getting more intense, and it had been part of a really a 3 to 4 year project to prepare for Tokyo. And suddenly, everything was coming into the final home straight, and we could see that, come April, we needed to have a number of tasks completed. May, a lot more tasks. In June, we had to be really completely locked and loaded. And to a large degree, we were extremely well prepared and were in a very good place to be able to go to Tokyo. So some of the challenge for us actually with our own employee group and with the performance directors, team leaders, and even the athletes, obviously, has been to step back from that state of intense preparedness and excitement and anticipation, and to be able to say, okay, we have to adjust to this and we have to adjust to a new reality, which from a business point of view is tricky. But when you're dealing with athletes and you're dealing with performance directors, there's another psychological layer, which I think affects us all, even or normal employees like myself. We also have to adjust and reset a little bit during the whole process.
Well, you talked about, there's such a unique cadence to the Olympics, right? This 4-year schedule for the Summer Games, and people go through different phases of preparation and training, and then the last minute, the last probably 3 to 6 months, right? Really just preparing to make the move and transition over to the new environment and get ready to compete. When was it that you started to realize that the Summer Games were supposed to start just 2.5 weeks from today would be at risk of missing that schedule?
I'd be really honest with you. I mean, a lot of people will say retrospectively, when they saw the news coming out of China in December, early January, that they started to realize there was potentially an issue that they really had to take stock of. However, I don't think the world realized at that point that this was going to be such a worldwide issue. I think certainly I remember putting it onto our risk register for the first time, which sounds like a very corporate thing to do, but it needed to be done. And I think that was in February. So I went the month of January without doing it. I put it to you like that. Probably should have, but I think it's a reflection of how we probably all felt, that perhaps it could be contained within the Wuhan province and might not move outside. As we know, it moved. It's moved everywhere, and it continues to move. And we've all reacted as a global community very well, I believe. But it's a real challenge, and I think it's only by working together internationally, actually, and that's one area that sport can really play a role, because it covers the world, I suppose, that we can resolve what we're facing.
And then what was the shift that happened, right? I mean, I think there was a period of uncertainty as to when the rescheduled games might take place. Would it be later in 2021? Would it go on the same schedule just a year later? Take me through, the shift in preparations, and the types of things that you had to do, and what is still left to do.
Yeah, there's been a huge amount, really, when you look back at it. But in March, when we started to realize that really the best step would be for a postponement of the games at that point, we at that stage weren't aware whether the Tokyo organizing committee would be happy to postpone, and we hoped against hope that it wouldn't be a cancellation. So I think from an organizational point of view, and particularly from the athletes' perspective, it was extremely important that it came about as a postponement. But in that period, we had to do a huge amount of reorganizing to be able to protect the athletes. So first of all, we kept the Sport Ireland Institute, where the athletes train nationally, the majority of them, open for as long as possible, but had to adopt a lot of new procedures to ensure that the risks were mitigated. And then when it became apparent that really we were going to have to close and start to work remotely, we began to put in place, I suppose, mechanisms so that the athletes could do a minimum or replicate some of what they were doing in order to keep their conditioning up to a certain level while at home. So we had to send out a lot of equipment to make sure that the athletes were looked after as best possible. And we had to make sure that there was regular contact and regular sharing of information with the performance directors and with the athletes themselves as to what was happening and how they could help us during this period and how we could help them. It's very tricky because, for a lot of athletes, they only probably get one real crack at the Olympic Games. Some are fortunate to have maybe 2, 3, even 4 Olympic Games. But the majority, it's one Olympic Games, and it's their whole life. They have in large parts set aside their careers, and they're focused on this hugely ambitious goal to be the best in the world, and to adjust in such a short space of time to say, well, okay, I've now got another 14 months. How do I deal with that? It's a journey that takes quite a lot of support. So we have been there to support them through that, and I know one of the things that's been particularly notable through this journey is the support that we've received from Indeed. Indeed has been working with us to really support the athletes on their journey, and that for us was particularly important when we embarked on the partnership. And we've been able to do that in quite an innovative way during the lockdown, and it's provided opportunities that maybe we hadn't foreseen beforehand.
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more. First of all, how do the athletes react, right? I mean, I think to your point, nobody wanted the games to be canceled, but maybe some of them wanted the games to go on in Tokyo and even take that risk of, some sort of community transmission during the games, or the notion of putting their entire lives on hold, as you say, for another 12 or 14 months. Are they working in between? Are they continuing with their training? Just how did they react, and what was their mentality?
So one of the first things that we tried to do was to give them that sense of assurance in terms of that their needs would be looked after. So any athletes that were on athlete scholarships, for example, we were immediately able to announce that those would continue, both from the International Olympic Committee scholarships that we award, and also from the Sport Ireland government-driven scholarships that are available in this country. So that was important because it takes the pressure off them, first and foremost. The second thing is that we had to work with them to readjust training schedules and to make sure that they weren't doing anything reckless or that was going to put them in any danger. And athletes, I suppose, will always want to try and compete, and because it's such an all-consuming part of what they do, the vast majority, if you had said, look, there's still COVID-19 in the community, would probably have wanted to compete. But I think they were very relieved when the announcement was made that the games would be postponed. And I do think it was the right call, and I think it was the prudent call and the safe call. We will have some difficult discussions next year. If there is still COVID-19 in the community, certain athletes may have slightly different points of view, and we have to respect that. But at the moment, really, from talking to the athletes as a whole, they really want to compete, but they're aware that they will have to put safety first.
Yeah, I mean, from a safety perspective, clearly the easiest thing is to slow down any events like this and postpone them almost indefinitely. And we don't know when we'll be back into a normal type of environment. How do the athletes handle that concept of planning for a set of games that may not actually ever occur, right? Because everybody with best intentions and with a set of goals and expectations of how things will move along with the health pandemic and treatments and potential vaccines, people believe that we'll be able to hold these games next summer, but there's no guarantee. I think everybody's really living in this world of uncertainty with no particular date of an end in sight. So how is that impacting the athletes and that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think athletes as a group, actually, because are trained almost from an early age in order to get where they arrived, to be very resilient, and they're also very good at compartmentalizing. So I know it's a cliche, but to control the controllables, and they understand that innately in what they do in their daily lives. So at the moment, they by and large realize that there's really not too much point in worrying about whether what will happen in 12 months' time. And really, they just have to stay focused and to keep that daily routine that they need to be able to prepare. In some cases, that is a challenge because, as you say, some of the athletes are getting a little bit older, or some of them had made decisions to put their lives on hold, put their careers on hold, and had said, look, I can afford to do this until 2020, but could I afford to do it to 2021 actually becomes a new conversation that in many cases has to be had with families, loved ones. They have to look at the financial realities. So, it's a real, quite a lot of pressures that can be placed on individual athletes. And I think it's at these times that it's particularly important for us as an Olympic Federation to show that support. So with our partners in the Sport Ireland Institute, there has been psychological support provided to athletes throughout this, and even the socialization aspect of using Zoom meetings with their team leaders has been particularly important. And getting on to the work that Indeed has been doing, it really sits extremely well, the whole proposition for the sponsorship of the Irish Olympic team, this care for the athletes and unleashing their talent. But it's about that career transition and helping them to be the best that they can be, the kind of the self-actualization piece. And there's been great opportunities for athletes to press the pause button in some cases and to think about their lives and think about what the next steps might be. And that's a place that Indeed has been able to provide real support during this current crisis.
Yeah, I want to get back to that in a moment, but first I want to touch on something that you mentioned, which is the psychological and the mental health aspects of this situation. And we've seen it as a business, and we've heard from lots of businesses. They're concerned about their employees, especially younger employees who may be living on their own and don't have the social connections that they would typically have as part of a workforce. Now with these athletes, they still do have this goal that they're pursuing, and there may be some inherent self-motivation that kind of gets them up in the morning and really encourages them to train. But can you talk about some of the community outreach things and the way that the athletes have stayed engaged with others that have helped them through this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you talk about those needs that people have, whether they're athletes or like us, going into work every day and trying to stay motivated and trying to make sure that you're bringing the group with you. For me, if we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's that those basic needs. Once we can make sure that the athletes feel safe, that their scholarships are continuing. That socialization piece and that self-esteem piece is extremely important. And I think that's been an area that we've been able to work on extensively during this period. We're aided actually by the fact that sports coverage has changed. So you have huge sports departments in all newspapers, across most digital media platforms, across all television stations. And suddenly they find they've actually got very little to report on. So they start to get back into the human stories and back into stories that ordinarily they might not report on so much. And our athletes have enjoyed a huge amount of profile during the lockdown period because of actions that they've been doing in the community, which are wonderfully motivating for them, but also extremely beneficial for society at large, and wouldn't ordinarily have been picked up on as much by the media, but have been during this crisis. So we have things like the athletes have been helping the elderly in the community by bringing food and bringing deliveries to them during the lockdown. We've had through a program that we run with schools for primary school children. It's been extremely difficult for children who have had to be taught at home by their moody parents, and I say that for myself. Bringing the athletes into their lives has been really beneficial. So we had Facebook Live sessions with school visits by athlete ambassadors during that period. We covered over 300 to 400 schools, and it was thousands and thousands of children enjoyed that week in, week out, and being able to really talk to their heroes and understand what they were going through. And it helps those children to rationalize and understand what's actually happening in the world when they hear it from somebody else who they might look up to. We've also, here in this country, we've had a daily schools hub for school children, so that it recreates the classroom environment while they haven't been able to be in a traditional classroom setting. And around this time of the year, traditionally, we would have sports days. So for a week, we had our athletes out on the national television, bringing kind of sports day to life for children who were from at home, and showing them how they can recreate some of the really important part of their lives growing up in their back gardens, albeit that they can't actually mix with their friends and their buddies from school. So there's been a large number, and plenty more than that, of initiatives that the athletes have taken part in. But I think the biggest thing that shines through for me is how they are such wonderful ambassadors, such wonderful inspiration to us all, and have also led by example, so that they have shown us that they understand what society is going through. There's a great empathy there, and there's a great support to help to bring the nation through what is a very difficult time.
Yeah, and we've been lucky to have this great team of Indeed ambassadors from Team Ireland. Sunita, the rower, Natalia Coyle, the decathlete, and Reese McClenahan has put out some videos, with inspirational messages showing the training that's been done at home. And I think that's just been a way for people to understand, right? Other people are going through it. How are they handling it? And what good can come of it? And sharing the messages, sharing the feelings has been a really powerful thing that I think reflects, fantastically on the athlete community. And now people are starting to get back into on-site training, right? Ireland has been fortunate, I think, in the global landscape of not being overrun by cases. Can you talk a little bit about the process of getting back to the training?
Yeah, it's been interesting. We've had a very good coordinated response nationally, and we probably benefit from being a relatively small country, that we can be quite agile and move reasonably quickly in the face of something as unprecedented as COVID-19. But the response has been considered good and quite effective at suppressing the cases in the community. We're not being complacent, but they are now down to a very low level. And the big hope is that they stay there. Although as reopening starts, there's always the danger that we could encounter a second wave. But that said, we did find it difficult for a period, because the athletes that we're dealing with there's probably about between 200 and 400 nationally who would be competing at the elite level. And while the approach generally nationwide to stop a lot of sports practice from taking place worked and needed to happen, we did need towards the end of the lockdown period a little bit more nuance, so that elite athletes could be exempt from some of the tighter restrictions that were in place for everyone else like myself. So, for example, we had 5 or 20 kilometer restrictions, so that people couldn't travel outside of those areas. But that was hampering the ability of some of our athletes to actually get to their training centres. So we had to call on the government and do a bit of lobbying to get that, to bring that about. And I think in that process, the athletes could see that we understood their needs and were very much on their side. So it was a positive thing. When we did reopen, the flow has been relatively low to start with and has built and built and built. So it's not being done in any way rashly. There's an awareness within each of the sports that they have to adopt a lot of new protocols and make sure that they do it properly and carefully. So athletes are now by and large back at training, and they're very happy. I think it gives them a new sense of focus. In some cases, they're waiting a little bit longer because the qualification periods have moved out, and they're actually using this as a period to reboot and give themselves, another few weeks before they come back into August and approaching September. So it really depends sport by sport, but I think having them back and for the athletes, it means a huge amount, because they can really restore the normality to their daily lives in a small part.
Yeah, it's an important thing. But I'm sure that there's a lot everybody is learning from the process of reopening, and you can't identify every risk that you might come across, and you learn from the different experiences. Have there been any instances where, certain sports have to have a different set of protocols than others? I mean, naturally, team sports, you can have more people involved, but are there any activities that have been deemed extra high risk that you've had to pull back on some of the training?
Yeah, and largely that's done on a sport by sport basis, and they review their protocol. They have our chief medical officer reviews each of the proposed protocols and make sure they're in line with where they need to be. But yes, there are quite a lot of differences. So, there are sports like some of the athletic disciplines that maybe they could be, certainly on the distance side, could be on the road in many cases. They weren't restricted in a massive way throughout. Some of the cycling disciplines as well, from an outdoor perspective, for road cycling. But then you have sports, where they need to be indoors. So swimming was quite a difficult one. So even now, the elite athletes have returned to training, but they're not using the changing rooms. They've got protocols in terms of getting in and out of the buildings, the number of people that can be training at any one time in the lanes. And, that goes for a lot of different sports. Indoor sports like badminton are affected in the same way. And the most difficult ones from our point of view would be the combat sports and contact sports. And Ireland has a very strong boxing heritage that affects us quite a lot. And we have some really promising talent coming through on the boxing side. So they're taking their time, and they are really having to look at ways that they can train in the ways that they can bring back the levels as they progress. It's the same for Taekwondo and a number of other sports.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch in the global landscape. You see golf and you see race car driving. Those are, you're pretty separate from the competition. So those are relatively easy to get back online. But now you think about soccer leagues starting up and professional basketball, professional baseball starting up. it's going to be a different set of risks, and I think we'll learn a lot. It's easy to see it in the hypothetical, right? You lay out the plans, and then once you get into the practical, sometimes it can be a much different story. So it'll be an interesting process, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even for team sports, we have our women's hockey team, and we'd hope they can do big things in Tokyo. But it's they've had to return in small clusters, and eventually that will become full group training. But in other countries within hockey, for example, they've seen full team training returns, but with strict protocol adopted. So, look, it's quite a tight-knit community within sport, and I think within performance sport even more so. So people can learn from each other, and hopefully we do learn from each other as we progress.
Yeah. Well, great. I do want to shift now a little bit and talk about Indeed's partnership with Team Ireland. And Indeed is a business we try to get very involved in the communities where we operate. And we thought this was just an amazing opportunity to be in support of the Irish people, and then also think about the experience of the athletes. Because as you mentioned, a lot of these Olympic athletes, they dedicate a good chunk of their life to participating in their sport. And then they've got to think about what comes next. And I'd love it if you could just talk about a little bit of the experience that the athletes have had dealing with the programs that Indeed has put in place, the career coach, and how it's maybe shifted or been different from what the expectations were when we first announced the partnership.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, it's I think we were really, really happy to see Indeed come on board. And I genuinely hope that Indeed as an organization also benefits significantly from the partnership. And it's really been very, very heartening to see. And I mean this, Dave, I know it sounds like I'm just saying it because I'm here, but it's not at all. To see you wearing the green jersey there, it's great, and Ireland's a small country. We are small, we know that. And, but there's great global appeal. So I'd like to think that, the employees of Indeed obviously they'll support their own countries first. And you have a huge and diverse workforce from many, many different countries, but that you'd also give us a hand and support the Irish athletes as through the process. And it's great to know we've got Indeed behind us. I suppose from the career coach point of view, you asked earlier about where we were when we got to March this year, and we were, to use a pun, locked and loaded and ready to go. And then suddenly we had to sort of step back, and it wasn't massively dissimilar from an Indeed perspective. So there had been a huge amount of work had gone into the career coach and how Indeed could support the athletes and unleash their talent unleashed, in your own words, to support them on that journey. And we were really, really glad to see that, because under our strategy, it's an athlete's first strategy, but it's not just winning at any cost. Obviously, we want to win, and we're very ambitious, and we're doing a lot of things that are being done now that we really hope will improve the prospects for our athletes. But they are people, and we need to remember that, and we need to support them on that journey, particularly when they've given so much to represent us. So the career coach that was being planned, initiatives that were being planned in come to fruition in February and March, really, had a number of aspects, such as presentation skills, thinking about the future, mentorships. It even had work placements. So we've had to modify those slightly in order, things like work placements. Clearly, that's not going to happen at the moment in the current environment, and hopefully that will come on stream at a later stage. But we have been able to provide the athletes with online sessions, and through the career coach, you'd have CV writing, you would have interview techniques, you would have a number of things that are really, the bread and butter of what Indeed does as a business, and being able to bring your skill sets to help our athletes. And that's been huge, and it's been really well received. And this is the interesting piece. When you look at adversity, often some of your best work can come out of adversity. And in many ways, having the athletes stuck at home because they were stuck, having quite a lot of time in their hands to actually think about, what am I doing and why am I doing this? Because a lot of them do just naturally review what they're doing and why they're doing it. it's been a wonderful opportunity to go to them and to say, look, Indeed would like to help you through this process and would like to talk to you about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you, Indeed as a company can help you on the next steps and that transition piece, which is vitally important. You hear far too many stories internationally about athletes who are supported all the way, and then they get to the big moment and suddenly the next day they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what to do, they don't know where to go, and they haven't really been advised to give it any thought. So through the online sessions, the athletes, and they've engaged really, really well with this, have had a great opportunity to look at those really, really important questions. And having the expertise and Indeed to support them in that has been immensely beneficial. And it's built up a real trust between the athletes and Indeed. And they've spoken extremely highly of it. And I think it will just create a relationship that will last long into the future. So well done.
Well, we appreciate that. I mean, it Indeed started with a mission really of serving job seekers as the priority. So we've built out a number of resources over the years that include content, career guides, as you said, resume writing services. And we hold in-person events. In typical times, we've held dozens of what we call job squad events in Ireland over the years and in all the different cities where we operate. But I think you're pointing to something which is unique in this moment, which is people have had this time out of their normal day-to-day routine. It's so easy to get tied up into your schedule and the direction you're going on. And I've heard from a lot of people that they've used this time to kind of reset their priorities in their life and what they actually want to be doing professionally. I'm wondering if you have any stories of athletes really rethinking what they might want to do post-competition in light of the health impact that's going on in the world, the social unrest that's kind of unwrapping in a lot of places around the globe, and how that's impacting people's points of view on their own future.
It's been huge. I think one of the biggest things actually that the athletes got out of the sessions was by being together in those sessions, and there were breakout sessions that you operated through the Zoom platform. They could see that they weren't alone, and they could see that the problems or issues or concerns that they had at that time were ones that were quite common and were shared by a lot of their fellow athletes. And having their own peer group in a funny way and not to talk to was particularly useful, because they could see, this is an area that we could look at, and this is an area that we could consider working on in the future. And a lot of them are at different stages, Dave. It's a little bit like encouraging young people to get pensions. They're not always the quickest to do it, and it's often, their parents or people around them who are advising them, look, you really should think about your future. And I know certainly from talking to some of the athletes that they have been looking at, in one case in particular, somebody was talking to me just the other day about media opportunities in the future and how to actually go about building a profile and how to start that process, and asking a little bit of advice about, who to start talking to and what qualifications might be useful in that process. But it's a very varied bunch. I mean, we had one of our Olympic rowers is a doctor, and he was really in his transition year. So he completed his university studies and was working in the hospitals during that period. And he knows what he wants to do. As an example, he wants to go into medicine and continue his career, but he's trying to balance these things, and he needed a little bit of support in approaching some of it was in Northern Ireland, so the National Health Service, in terms of being able to continue competing as an athlete during this period, now that he has to spend another year in doing it. So there are so many different types of people, no different to the diversity that you see in your own business generally. It's very much reflected in the athlete community. So I think it's the big advantage has been the fact that what Indeed has brought isn't just simply, look, everyone, this is the way it is, and this is what you have to do, and this is where you have to go. It's been a very tailored approach. And the fact that you've actually put time and effort and resources into spending, proper discussion, two-way conversations with the athletes, and also to allow those discussions with their peer groups means that it's much more meaningful. And that's why the feedback has been so strong.
So obviously things have changed so much. What's your best case scenario for the next year? How would, if you were going to write the story of the next 12 months leading up to the newly scheduled Tokyo 2021 games, how would that play out, and how would things end post Olympics for these athletes?
Yeah, I mean, the best case scenario for me is we're starting to plan already for Paris, and we had done some work, and that's in 2024, and we had done some work already on that last year. Obviously, some of that has been put on hold, but we've continued and used the lockdown actually to build on some of the initiatives that we've been preparing for. But it's interesting that having the Tokyo Olympic Games in 2021 and then having the Paris Olympic Games in 2024 means that there's a closer time between the two. And from a best case scenario, what I'd really like to see is that, it gives an opportunity that extra 14 months or extra 12 months gives the opportunity to a number of athletes who were knocking on the door for Paris to come and be part of it for Tokyo and really use that experience as a jumping board to help them on in terms of their Paris experience. I'd also like to see that the Olympic Games themselves becomes a real expression of who we are as humans and what we've come through. And I think that it's be hugely resonating to everyone. And I think there's a great possibility that could happen.
Yeah, sports can really transcend political issues, societal issues, can bring people together. And the Olympics, they're really meant to be the purest representation of sports, right? The competition, the community. I think it would be a great way to close if you could share your hopes of how the Olympics themselves will impact the world in 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's for me, that would be one of the strongest things for the Olympic movement if this comes about, is that we have a Games that is a beacon of hope to humanity and can really show how we have collectively, because I think it has to be more than just individual nations. It has to be about a global effort and how collectively as humans we have come through this together and managed to succeed. And that for me would be a wonderful celebration of humanity, added to those moments that transcend all borders when you see really exceptional feats of human endeavor being enacted in front of you on sports fields and in athletic stadiums. And I think that for me would be something really fantastic and something meaningful to look forward to.
Well, humanity and community and overcoming adversity, perhaps there's nothing more that the world could use today. Peter Sherrard, CEO of the Olympic Federation of Ireland, thanks so much for joining us today, and best of luck at the 2021 Games.
Thanks, Dave. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks to you and to everyone at Indeed for your support. It really means a lot to us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Best of luck.